Hi, my name is Paige Jarvis. I used to think betrayal looked like screaming or slamming doors. But for me, it was silence. It was coming home to find my childhood photos shredded, my suitcase thrown on the porch, and then hearing my own sister scream, "Finish her, Mom," as gasoline soaked the floor around me. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased. And just when I thought it was over, the FBI kicked the door down. You ever wonder what it feels like to survive your own family's plot to destroy you? The autumn air in Briarwood had a strange way of carrying both memory and decay. When I stepped out of my rental car that morning, the air felt too clean, too bright for a day like this. The house in front of me, my father's house, had changed. The old shutters were gone, replaced with modern white trim that clashed with the brick. The porch swing, the one he built for my 12th birthday, was missing. And the brass plaque with his name, once fixed proudly beside the front door, had vanished. I stood there longer than I should have, staring, pretending maybe I was at the wrong address. But I wasn't. This was home once. I clutched the funeral program tighter. My fingers smudged the black ink where his name was printed in bold. Orion Jarvis, 1949 to 2011. The silence around the house made my throat tighten. It was too quiet for grief. It was the kind of quiet you hear right before someone slams a door in your face. When I finally gathered myself enough to knock, the door opened before I could even touch it. Valora stood there, my stepmother, dressed in a dark gray suit, her hair in a perfect French twist. Not a single tear mark touched her makeup. Behind her, I could see people moving around the living room, laughing lightly, drinking from crystal glasses. It wasn't mourning, it was a reception. "Oh," she said, her voice clipped. "You made it." It was the same tone you'd use when the mailman shows up late. "Of course I did," I answered. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Inside, the scent of polished wood and potpourri hit me. My father used to hate that smell. He said it made the house feel fake, like a stage hotel. Now it was everywhere, masking any trace of him. The family photos on the wall had been rearranged, all neatly aligned in silver frames. Every one of them showed Valora, her daughter Sable, and my father smiling at some event. Not one included me. The one photo that used to hang near the fireplace, me sitting on his lap, holding a carved wooden horse, was gone. "Paige!" Sable's voice carried from across the room. She walked toward me in heels that clicked like a metronome. She looked every bit the image Valora had molded her into, elegant, confident, and cold. She hugged me, just long enough for people to see, then stepped back. "It's been, 2 years? You look tired." I smiled the way you do when you're cornered. "Longer, I think." "Well, you missed quite a lot," she said, her hand already reaching for her wine. "Dad was sick for months. We thought you knew." "I did know," I replied quietly. "He didn't want visitors." Valora's smile didn't move her eyes. "He didn't want stress. You tend to bring emotion into situations." I swallowed the words that came to my tongue. Emotion? He was my father. But in that room, emotion felt like a weapon they'd already stripped from me. The pastor began to speak about family unity, about forgiveness. My name wasn't mentioned in his prayer. I checked the funeral bulletin. My name wasn't printed anywhere, not even under surviving children. It was as if I'd already died alongside him. After the final blessing, Valora clinked a glass to draw attention. "Before everyone leaves," she said, "there's one last bit of housekeeping. Orion wanted things handled peacefully. I've prepared some documents for the immediate family to sign." A murmur moved through the guests. I froze. She gestured toward me with the faintest smile. "Paige, dear, this includes you too." I followed her into my father's study, though it no longer felt like his. The books were reorganized by color, something he'd have hated. His desk had been polished to a gleam, and the papers were stacked too neatly. Valora handed me a folder with my name typed in bold at the top. "It's just a clarification," she said smoothly, "for the estate division. Nothing complicated." Sable leaned against the wall, sipping wine, watching me. "Dad would want peace, Paige. Don't make this messy." I scanned the first page. Legal jargon. Clarification was the word Valora used, but what I saw was a transfer of property rights. Everything in my father's name redirected to her and Sable. My hand went cold. "This isn't what Dad wanted," I said, setting the pen down. Valora's smile tightened. He trusted me to handle this. You've been away for so long, it's best you let those who were here take care of things. Sable tilted her head. Don't be dramatic. Sign it. Let's just move forward. When I didn't answer, Valora leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume, sharp, synthetic, and suffocating. Don't make this ugly, sweetie. Your father wouldn't like that. Something in me snapped, quietly. You don't get to tell me what my father would or wouldn't like. Her eyes hardened. Fine. Suit yourself. She took the folder back, her tone turning sweet for the onlookers. We'll handle it later. Paige is just emotional. I stepped out of the room before I said something I'd regret. The laughter from the other guests followed me down the hallway like ghosts. I wandered toward the living room again, just in time for the memorial video to begin. The screen flickered to life. Photos, soft piano music, slow dissolves between scenes of my father smiling. I expected to see at least one image of the two of us. There were none. Instead, the sequence looked like a highlight reel of Valora's life with him. Cruises, holidays, fundraisers. Every shot carefully chosen. I stood frozen as people around me murmured. A woman behind me whispered, I didn't know he had a second daughter. That one sentence hit harder than anything Valora could have said. I left the room before the slideshow ended. The air outside was cool, the sky low and gray. The yard still held faint outlines where his garden used to be. He planted marigolds every year, so they reminded him of beginnings. Now the soil was bare, replaced with gravel. I sat on the porch steps, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Memories came uninvited. His laugh, the way he tapped the steering wheel to old rock songs, his rough hands fixing the swing that used to creak every summer night. And then his voice, the last time I saw him in the hospital. Don't ever let them steal your light. At the time, I thought he was delirious. Now I understood. This wasn't grief. This was erasure, deliberate, organized, complete. I wiped my face and stood up. Through the window, I saw Valora raising her glass again. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear her words. I didn't need to. I could read the expression. Ownership, satisfaction. When I turned to leave, her voice carried through the door. The house will be on the market next week. My feet rooted to the ground. Sable appeared behind me, her perfume sharp, her tone casual. You really shouldn't have come back. The next morning, the kitchen in my childhood home felt like a museum display, glossy surfaces, muted conversation, and that still air of distance between me and the people I once believed were my family. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my coffee mug rumbling in my grasp, hearing nothing more than cups clinking, a spoon tapping the edge of a china saucer. My stepmother, Valora, sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on a newspaper. My sister, Sable, was there too, pulling her hair behind her ear as if she were still at some cocktail party, though we were in the suburbs of Briarwood, Illinois, not Manhattan. Morning, Paige, Sable said without looking up. Good morning, I replied, my voice quieter than I expected. I took a seat at the end of the table where things used to be casual. The scrambled eggs, the orange juice, the dog barking next door, the banter about the day. Not anymore. I scanned the room, framed photos with my father and Valora and Sable standing at charity dinners, at lake houses, with their arms around each other. I searched for one of me. None. I set down my mug. What time's the luncheon? I asked. Valora glanced at her watch. We're heading into town in an hour, she said, inflecting the word we. It sank in. I wasn't included in this we. My stomach fluttered. At the cafe downtown, the smell of roasted coffee and the squeak of chairs felt weirdly alien. I walked in, looked for the table reserved for Jarvis family and friends. There were name cards printed in refined script. Valora Jarvis, Sable Jarvis, David Jarvis Jr., a cousin I barely knew. I flipped through the flyer placed on each place setting. The header read in appreciation for the supporters of the Ori and Jarvis estate. I searched the list. Valora's name, Sable's name, Cousin David's name. Mine. Not a peep. I asked the server quietly, is there another version of this flyer with all the names? She looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, that's the only one we printed. I felt the eyes of distant relatives and acquaintances on me, some casting furtive glances, others simply avoiding them. One woman leaned in and murmured, Oh, I thought I saw your name on the list. But she didn't look at me when she spoke. I sipped my coffee and nudged the flyer across the table. Sable tapped her nails and smirked. This is just the start, she said as though it were a consolation prize for losing a competitive game. Later, back at the house, I tried to breathe, tried to make sense of what I was experiencing. Belora found me in the living room, holding a new credit card she flicked across the couch. Mom and I are handling things now, Sable announced brightly. My mind spun. Wait, what about the estate? I thought matters were still in probate. I asked. Belora chuckled softly. No worries, dear. Everything's been finalized. She looked at me as though I had asked about the weather. I felt my pulse quicken. How? Without me. I managed. Sable turned to me, chrome nails glinting in the late afternoon light. You signed it, remember, she said with a slow grin. My fingers froze on the armrest. I traced my memories back to the document I had been handed at the funeral, Velora's folder, her smile, the casual words, a clarification for the estate. The pen that lay in front of me. I signed. What I thought was a symbol of closure turned out to be the key to lock me out. Later that evening, I retreated to what used to be my room, now a guest bedroom painted beige. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled the folder out again, with its legal jargon, and compared it to the will I found in the attic, the letter from Dad, and the bank statements I kept tucked away. My name vanished from the ownership clause entirely. I scrolled through my phone, drafted an email to Jake, my law school friend, begging for help. But I stopped before I typed please. I couldn't bring myself to admit I didn't know what to do next. A knock sounded at my door just then. My heart pounded. I opened the door. Sable stood there in her heels, arms crossed. You'll be out of this house by Sunday. Her voice was calm, like she was asking for the salt. I didn't reply. I just watched her leave. My knuckles were white around the folder in my hands. I closed the door and sank into the bed. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the light of the street lamp outside. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, hearing the distant hum of cars passing on the quiet street, wondering how home became a stranger's territory. You'll be out of this house by Sunday. That sentence echoed through my head long after Sable's footsteps faded down the hall. I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning it over, dissecting the venom behind her calm delivery. By dawn, the first trace of light filtered through the curtains, and I was still wide awake, staring at the ceiling like it might hold an answer. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the pipes seemed hesitant to make a sound. I got up before the sun had fully risen. My bare feet pressed against the cold wooden floor, the boards creaking softly as I moved. Something in me pulled toward the attic, the one place in this house that hadn't been touched by Velora's obsession with control and polish. The rest of the house felt sterile, like a showroom, but the attic had always been my father's territory, cluttered and real. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way up the narrow staircase. Dust floated in the beam of light as I opened the hatch. The smell hit me instantly, wood, old paper, and something faintly metallic. I coughed, covering my mouth, then pulled myself up. It was just as I remembered, stacks of boxes labeled in my father's tidy handwriting, some with years written in marker, others simply marked keep. The rafters groaned under my weight as I moved toward the back corner, where my childhood things were stored. I passed by a stack of record albums, a rusted typewriter, and a broken lamp I used to insist we could fix together. I found a box labeled Page, School, and another, smaller one next to it. Page, Private. My chest tightened. I knelt down and brushed the dust away, tracing the faded ink with my fingers. For a long moment, I just stared, too nervous to open it. My father wasn't a sentimental man, but he wasn't careless either. If he labeled something private, it meant he wanted me to find it someday, not them. I lifted the lid carefully. Inside were fragments of another life, ribbons from science fairs, an old Polaroid of me missing my front teeth, a folded note from my 5th grade teacher that said, "She's curious, but questions too much." I smiled faintly. Then, under all that, a small shoebox. My breath caught. The top was taped shut, but the label, written in my father's slanted script, made my stomach twist. Page for later. My hands shook as I peeled the tape away. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed envelope, was a letter, creased, smudged, but unmistakably his handwriting. My throat went dry. I sat back, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the wall. The first line hit me like a wave. If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect you. I stopped breathing for a second. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the rest of the letter. This house is yours, Paige. It always has been. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I've seen what greed does to people. If they come for you, and they will, remember that paper can lie, but truth leaves fingerprints. The ink near the bottom was smeared, as if someone had touched it before it dried. There was no date, but the tone felt recent, the kind of words written by a man who knew his time was running short. I sat there for what felt like hours, rereading each line, hearing his voice in every word. Tears blurred the paper. My father had tried to warn me to leave a piece of himself behind. And now, his warning was the only thing keeping me anchored in that house. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The attic felt heavier now, charged with something sacred. When I finally climbed back down, the morning sun had turned golden through the kitchen window. I poured myself coffee, my hand still shaking, when I saw Valora's car keys on the counter. She and Sable were already gone, probably running errands or, more likely, finalizing whatever plan they'd been working on to push me out. I couldn't stay there. Not right then. My chest was tight, and I needed air, distance, perspective. I grabbed my coat and walked down the long gravel driveway toward town. The air was crisp, the kind that carried the smell of burning leaves and the faint hum of someone's radio in the distance. Downtown Briarwood hadn't changed much. Same diner, same thrift store, same post office with its broken flagpole. I passed the cafe from the luncheon 2 days ago, and my stomach turned remembering the whispers, the side glances. I kept walking until I reached the small park at the end of Main Street. That's where I saw her, Narina. She was sitting on a bench near the pond, feeding breadcrumbs to ducks like she always did. Narina had been our neighbor for as long as I could remember, kind, sharp, and far too observant for Valora's liking. She looked up when she saw me and patted the spot beside her. "Paige Jarvis," she said with that half-smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Haven't seen you in years. Sorry for your loss." "Thanks," I murmured, sitting down. She tossed another crumb into the water before lowering her voice. "I heard about the funeral. I also heard about what happened after." I tensed. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't hear it from me, but Valora's been visiting a lawyer for months, long before your father passed. I overheard them talking outside my window once, late at night. She said something about revising documents, making sure the new papers matched her version of events." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you sure?" Narina nodded. "As sure as I am that woman hasn't shed a real tear in 20 years. Your father came by the next day, asking if I still had the notary contact from when he updated his will back in '08. He looked upset, said something about things getting out of hand. It hit me like a slow, cold realization Valora hadn't just manipulated the estate after his death. She'd been rewriting his legacy while he was still alive. Narina placed a hand on mine, her touch warm, steady. "Be careful, honey. Those two aren't playing fair." I swallowed hard, nodding. "I won't let them win." By the time I walked back home, the sun had started to dip, turning the horizon orange. My shoes crunched against the driveway gravel. The house looked different now, smaller, almost shrinking under its own secrets. I went inside, careful not to make noise. I headed straight for my room, pulled out my laptop, and laid out everything I had. The letter, my notes from Narina, photos of a document I'd signed. I started listing it all in 2 columns on the screen, what I know versus what I can prove. Under what I know, Valora changed the locks on Dad's office a month before he died. Sable bragged about handling things with the bank. The will I saw after the funeral isn't the same one Dad showed me last year. Under what I can prove, the letter, Narina's statement, my signature on the fake clarification. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. My father had taught me how to be patient, how to observe before I acted. He once told me, the truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to survive long enough to be found. That line echoed as I worked. Hours passed. The house went silent again. No footsteps, No clinking glasses, nothing but the steady hum of my laptop. I didn't even notice when the clock hit midnight. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning, and whispered to the empty room. "You try to protect me, Dad. Now it's my turn." That promise stayed with me through the night, echoing in my chest long after the house went silent. By morning, my throat was dry, and my stomach knotted with a kind of quiet dread that coffee couldn't wash away. The sun filtered through the curtains in streaks of pale gold, the kind of light that should have felt peaceful. But peace had left this house a long time ago. I dressed quickly, threw on my coat, and headed into town. I told myself I needed milk, maybe bread, anything to make the trip look ordinary. The grocery store sat on the edge of Main Street, right beside the post office. I'd grown up waving to people here, but now as I stepped inside, conversations dipped and eyes flickered toward me before darting away. The cashier, a woman I went to high school with, Beth, gave me a careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, Paige," she said softly. "It's been a while. You okay?" "I'm fine," I answered a little too fast. She hesitated, scanning my milk. "It's just people talk, you know. They said you've been struggling again." I told them that didn't sound like you. "Struggling?" I repeated. "Who said that?" Beth looked away. "You know how this town is. I shouldn't even be repeating it." I paid for the groceries and left, but the word clung to me like a burr. Struggling. I'd lived here long enough to know how rumors start, a whisper at a church potluck, a passing comment at the salon. But this wasn't random gossip. Someone wanted to brand me as unstable. As I walked down the street, the wind carried fragments of laughter from the cafe. My father's friends, people who'd eaten at our table, were gathered there. I caught bits of their conversation, my name, followed by words like breakdown, unwell, and too much stress. By the time I got back to the house, my pulse was pounding. The driveway was full of cars, Valora's silver Lexus, Sable's black SUV, and two others I didn't recognize. I peeked through the window and saw a cluster of women in pastel blouses around the dining table, glasses of lemonade in their hands. A banner hung over the mantel, Neighborhood Luncheon, in memory of Orion Jarvis. No one had told me. Of course. I put the milk away, smoothed my coat, and walked right in. Every conversation stopped. The women smiled awkwardly, the way people do when a stranger interrupts a private moment. Valora rose from her chair, perfectly composed. "Oh, Paige," she said, her voice dripping honey. "You should have told me you wanted to join us. We'd have set another place." I forced a smile. Didn't know I needed an invitation to my father's house. A few of the women exchanged glances. One of them, Mrs. Connors, our old neighbor, cleared her throat and said, "We were just saying how sad it was that you weren't yourself toward the end. I heard you had to be hospitalized once. Poor thing." My jaw tightened. "That's not true," I said evenly. Valora placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Connors' arm. Now, everyone just wants to make sure Paige's health is stable. Losing a parent can bring up old issues." The words hit like a slap. I turned to her. "You're spreading lies about me?" Valora's expression didn't flicker. People worry about unstable energy in family matters. Can't blame them for caring. My hands trembled, not from fear, from fury. I wanted to scream, to expose her right there. But I saw the faces watching, half sympathetic, half judging. That's how gaslighting works. Make someone doubt their own footing while you smile through it. I excused myself, my voice calm even though I felt like I was standing on glass. "Enjoy your luncheon." When I got to the hallway, Sable followed. "You shouldn't take things so personally," she whispered. "Mom's just trying to manage the optics." "Optics?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "You mean lying." Sable's mouth twitched. Sometimes lying's cleaner than the truth. That evening, I found out there was another gathering, a private dinner in honor of Orion. I learned about it by accident, overhearing two of Valora's friends at the cafe. My name, again, wasn't on the list. But this time I went anyway. When I walked into the dining room, the smell of roasted chicken and candle wax filled the air. The laughter faded instantly. Valora looked up from her chair at the head of the table, fork poised midair. "Paige," she said lightly, "this dinner is for those who helped during Orion's final months." I looked around. I was his daughter. Sable leaned back, wine swirling in her glass. You never even visited when Dad was sick. You called once, maybe twice. That's not true, I said, but my words felt small in the space. Valora set her fork down and smiled thinly. We all grieve differently. You preferred distance. We respected that. The other guests avoided my eyes, pretending to be fascinated by their plates. I stood there, motionless, realizing they'd rewritten the narrative again. In their version, I was the absent child, unstable, unfit to inherit, and they were the devoted caretakers, calm and noble. I wanted to lash out, to throw every truth I had at them, the letter, the forgery, the manipulation. But I knew that's what they wanted. If I lost control here, in front of witnesses, I'd prove their point. So I smiled. Enjoy your dinner. I walked out to the porch and stood in the cold, the night pressing close around me. The trees rustled like they were whispering secrets. My breath clouded in front of me, disappearing into the dark. I could hear faint laughter through the walls, muffled but sharp. For the first time, I understood the depth of their cruelty. They weren't just cutting me out, they were dismantling my identity piece by piece. Later, I locked myself in my room. The walls seemed to pulse with every memory of this house. The sound of my father's footsteps, his humming when he read the paper, his voice calling me kiddo. I sat at the desk with my phone recording, speaking softly into the mic. This is for the record, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to matter. They're trying to erase me, but I have proof. I have his letter. I played his words over in my mind. Don't let them convince you. That single line burned behind my eyes like a warning. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow lit the darkroom. I created a new document and typed the title, List of Violations, Estate Fraud. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed the first entry. Valora Jarvis, Defamation and Mental Manipulation. I paused, the sound of the keys still echoing. The storm outside rattled the window, and the house seemed to shift in its foundation. Old wood, old secrets. I could feel the tide turning, slow but certain. They'd played their game in the shadows long enough. Let's see how you handle the light, I whispered. When I dialed Jake's number that morning, I didn't expect empathy. I expected almost nothing. But as the autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, now relegated to a guest room, my phone pressed to my ear, and I listened to a familiar voice. Paige, this is tough. Without hard proof, you don't have a case. He sounded carefully polite, like a doctor giving bad news. My mind spiral turned, not because of what he said exactly, but because he believed it. The man who graduated law school beside me now believed I was unraveling. I have the letter, I said. My voice held more steadiness than I felt. The sign folder. The recordings. They're all here. I paused. I think they changed the will before Dad died. There's a chance, Jake said slowly. But when your own family circulates a rumor your unstable courts give them the benefit of doubt. They'll lean on mental health claims. I'm sending you a list of therapists, not attorneys. I'm sorry. I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My chest felt hollow. I stared at the screen. He hung up. I sat for another long moment, the clock ticking in the quiet room, the curtains still closed. The reality hit. I was isolated in my own home, fighting people who were meant to protect me. I trusted them. I thought the house and legacy belonged to me. Now I was the outsider. That afternoon, restless, I walked down the gravel path behind the house, past the old maple tree where Dad carved his initials when I was 10. I needed air, clarity. The leaves crunched under my boots. I found myself heading to the small park at the edge of town, the one with the pond and the bench where Narina sat when she fed the ducks. I'd always seen her there, quiet, methodical, someone who observed more than spoke. When I arrived, she was there, tossing breadcrumbs. The pond shimmered and the wind whispered low. Paige Jarvis, she said, standing slowly. Sorry for your everything. Her voice measured. Thanks, Narina, I said. I needed a walk. She nodded. I heard some things I didn't want to believe. Valora meeting with a lawyer months ago, while your father was still alive, talking about revising documents, hiding original drafts. My stomach churned. What do you know exactly? Enough to know those talks weren't about charity, she said. They were about control. Your dad seemed worried. Came here the next day, quiet. Said some things are happening behind closed doors. I listened, let it absorb. My father's voice echoed in memory. Don't let them convince you. I closed my eyes for a second. Trembling isn't weakness, it's a signal. Thank you, I said. This means more than you know. We left the park side by side in silence. I returned home as dusk settled across the town. The house felt alien, too neat, too staged. I crept inside, pulled the door closed gently, and headed to my room. My laptop waited. The folder with the letter rested on the bed beside it. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Section titled, What I Know. Bullet points emerging. Dad's original will dated 2008 gone. Valora's visits to lawyer office before his passing. Signed clarification document, my name missing as owner. Next column, what I can prove. Handwritten letter addressed to me. Audio snippet Narina recorded. My signature on the document extracted from a state file. I hit save, leaned back, listening to the hum of the heater and the distant sound of someone's car outside. This was not the home I remembered. It was a stage. My father's memory and mine were being stripped from it. Night deepened. I knew I couldn't rest yet. I opened the folder again. The legal folder from the day of the funeral, green cover, crisp white pages. I traced the signature, mine and the date. I could swear when I signed I had asked what I was signing, and was told, just a clarification page. I shut my eyes. I hadn't asked enough. A knock on the window startled me. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. The house was silent. I swung the curtain aside and saw a dark figure, Narina, hushed and urgent. I pulled back the sash and opened the window. Here, she said, handing me a small thumb drive. Don't lose this. She turned away before I could thank her properly. I sat back inside, shut the window, and plugged the drive into my laptop. A file named VJ_estate_leak appeared. I clicked, and the voice came through. Valora Jarvis, calm and calculating. She's irrelevant. Sign the papers. Get her out. The house should stay with us. Then Sable's clear voice. I'll guilt her into it. That's what she responds to. My pulse thundered. I pressed pause. The recording was dated months ago, both voices recorded in a meeting I wasn't meant to see. Anger bloomed inside me, not the out-of-control sort. A still, sharp flame. I knew this was the moment to stop reacting. To start acting. A memory of Dad's frame in the living room came to mind. His quiet dignity, his faith in me. I backed up the file to the cloud, encrypted. I whispered into darkness. You've made your final mistake. I turned off the lamp. The night wrapped around the house like an enemy, but I didn't feel small anymore. I felt anchored. I sat at my desk that morning staring at the digital file named VJ_estate_leak.mp3 on my computer screen, the blue glow bouncing off the wall in the quiet guest bedroom. My fingers were still slightly trembling, but beneath that shaky feeling was something else, steady resolve. I had known for days that something wasn't right. Now I had proof. It was time to stop watching and start acting. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had memorized, the one Narina provided. The ringing seemed loud in the stillness of the house. When she answered, I said without greeting, I have the recording. She paused, then said, Good. That's more than most have at this stage. I need to know what it means now, I replied, leaning back in the chair, my gaze drifting to the corners of the room where family photos used to hang. They were gone now, replaced with the flawless walls Valora liked. Narina said, You understand, I used to work with elder fraud cases for the Bureau. What they're doing isn't just cruel, it's criminal. Her voice carried the certainty of someone who has fought this kind of battle before. Criminal, I repeated. The word tasted heavy, like iron in my mouth. She gave me a new number. An agent at the Bureau will review your file. Send it tonight. Don't say a word about me. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. Just be ready. I logged into my email, attached the letter from my father, the signed document, and the audio file. My heart raced when I hit send. I felt exposed, but also strangely calm. The tide was turning. Later that day I found myself driving to the sheriff's office. An odd move, but I needed a paper trail. The old wood-paneled building smelled of coffee and stale air, and I sat on a bench in the lobby tapping my fingers on the plastic seat. A deputy took my statement, not about arson, not yet, but about suspicious activity. Locked doors changed, documents moved, unexplained meetings. I treated it like meeting a friend for coffee, but inside I was charging a minefield. When I left the office, my heart still ticking, I drove through downtown Briarwood to clear my head. The autumn wind rattled the windshield, and I remember those afternoons long ago when my father would pull his truck alongside the curb and say, "Hop in, kiddo. Let's grab some ice cream." Those moments were real. The facade of goodwill Valora had painted over them was beginning to chip. I returned home in dusk light. I opened the front door carefully. I didn't want to trigger suspicion. The house greeted me with a gloss it didn't earn. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and checked my phone. A message flashed. "Try harder. You're going down." The sender was unlisted. My throat tightened. I deleted the message and looked out the window into the yard. The house across the street had its porch light off. I sensed eyes watching. That night I went to bed with the computer screen open. I typed the link for the audio file, for the FBI, if anything happens to me. I saved it in a folder I named backup_truth. I thought of my father's voice. He used to say, "The truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to survive long enough to be found." I lay there with the moonlight seeping through the curtains. I let the heaviness of what I was doing settle. Then a knock on the window startled me. I froze. I looked across the yard. A dark figure slipped away. Then I saw the car. 2 tires flat, rims kissed by the concrete. My chest clenched. Whoever wanted me gone didn't want threats. They wanted silence. The next morning, I discovered latex gloves on the driveway. Someone tried to frame this as something I did. I took a photo of them with my phone, placed them in a bag. Documentation. Proof. I filed a police report for property damage and tampering, and I included references to the recording, the letter, the document. When I told Valora I was talking to the sheriff's office, she replied, "Maybe you should talk to someone about your issues." She spoke as if she were offering help. The facade cracked. The following afternoon, a crisp wind blowing maple leaves around the porch, I opened my mail. A court filing envelope from Valora's attorney. Inside, a restraining order against me for digital stalking and defamation. My heart pounded. Sable's message appeared online. "We told you not to push us." Her words were flat, like a verdict. I called Jake again. He listened for several seconds and then said, "You need to respond, but not from panic. If you respond emotionally, they win." He offered limited assistance, but the message was clear. I had to stay focused. I had to use strategy, not anger. That night I sat on the bed, surrounded by papers. I opened the backup_truth folder and read my father's letter again. The line "This house is yours" page. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise" glowed in my mind. I whispered to the dark, "I know what you're doing now. I see it." Then I saved everything, backed it up in 2 places, and ignored the fire alarm that beeped softly the next room over. Before sleep claimed me, I looked out the window one last time and made a promise. This house will belong to the truth. And for once, I believed it. For the FBI, if anything happens to me. Late that night, I sat in the driver's seat of my old sedan, parked in front of our family home. The engine was off, the street lamp casting a golden glow on the cracked pavement. I had just uploaded the clip, 90 seconds of Valora's voice, calm, predatory, and immediately the phone started buzzing. Private messages, missed calls, silent notifications. I closed the door gently and rested my head back on the seat, feeling the weight of what I'd done. There was no going back now. I logged into the anonymous account I'd created. Username, Truth Jarvis. I tapped the upload button, watched the progress bar hit 100%. Then I posted a short caption. "This is what estate abuse looks like. Watch, share, decide." Within minutes, comments flooded in. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years, distant cousins, even people from my father's charity circles. "I'm sorry," one wrote. "Can't believe this is your story." Another sent, "Thank you for bravely speaking up." I watched the replies for as long as the street remained quiet, and then I left the car and walked to the front door. Inside, everything looked the same, but I knew the facade had cracked. The next morning, the local newspaper arrived at my porch with the headline, "Jarvis Estate, Daughter Speaks Out." A reporter from the paper called, asking for an interview. I paused before answering. "I'm ready," I said. My voice didn't shake. I gathered the letter from my father, the audio file link, the signed documents, and placed them in a folder labeled Jarvis Evidence. I shut the front door and headed into the town. In the coffee shop, I met the reporter, a tall woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, keen eyes. "Paige Jarvis?" she asked. I nodded. Over 2 hours, I recounted what I discovered, the missing names, the changed will, the Lexus parked outside the estate office, the quietly recorded meeting. She scribbled notes. When I handed her the thumb drive containing Valora's voice, she paused. "This will change everything," she said. Back at home, Valora sat in the living room with Sable and 2 family friends. When the news article appeared on tablets and phones throughout the room, the peaceful expressions on their faces faltered. I watched from the doorway. "So you decided to play it loud," Valora said softly when I stepped in. "Not loud. Truthful," I replied. Her lips pressed together. Sable stood behind her. "We just wanted Mom to get what she deserved," Sable said, her voice caught in the middle of anger and realization. "It was her house before Dad anyway." That phrase hit me like a punch. The motive was not fairness. It was vengeance. They had lied about love and respect. I felt an unfamiliar heat behind my eyes. A long time ago, I'd walked these rooms as the youngest daughter, trusted by my father, dismissed by the others. Now I was standing, upright, pointing out the deceit. Friends and relatives began to pull away from them. A cousin posted on Facebook, "I can't support what you did to Paige." Another deleted old family pictures, where Valora's smile shined next to Dad's. The family image built with press releases and charity events was collapsing. I watched from the margins, a quiet observer in what I'd once thought was home. That evening, I found Sable in the kitchen. She was rinsing a glass, soap suds dripping onto the countertop. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "You think this is over?" she whispered when she didn't look up. "You haven't seen what Mom's capable of." I caught that as a challenge, not a threat. I looked away, then back calmly. "I'm ready." The house was quiet as I left the kitchen. I walked up the stairs slowly, every echo of my steps amplified in the stillness. I reached my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. The laptop was open. I replayed the audio file once more. The cold clarity of Valora's words filled the air. I closed my eyes. Rage coiled in my chest. The memories of being the invisible daughter surfaced, the seat at the edge of the table, the name missing from the bulletin, the handshake at the funeral disguised as affection. In the dark, I typed 2 words in big letters across the top of the document, Jarvis Estate Fraud. Below that I listed everything, what I knew, what I recorded, the witnesses, the shreds of diaries, the evidence. I saved the file, backed it up, and logged out of the anonymous account. I felt the storm gather outside, wind rattling the windows, branches tapping like drum beats. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the house. The porch light blinked. A dove perched on the railing, then took flight. I thought of my father and his laughter, his rough hands working on the swing in the backyard when I was 10. I thought of how safe I once felt in this house. That safety was gone, but in its place something sharper had grown. Resolve. Tomorrow would be public. The reporter would publish. Friends would ask questions. Neighbors would talk. The lies, the manipulation, the shift in power, everything would come into the open. I lay in bed, the moonlight casting shapes on the ceiling. Soft echoes of a storm outside waned. My phone vibrated with a new message. I didn't look. The image of Valora's voice, Sable's confession, the document on the screen, they were part of my armor now. I whispered into the darkness, "You brought this on yourself." It was nearly dark when I turned into the driveway. The porch light was on, casting long, uneven shadows across the yard. Something immediately felt wrong. My suitcase sat on the porch steps, zipped, packed, and waiting, as if I were already gone. For a moment, I just stood there, one hand still on the car door. The evening air smelled faintly of smoke and damp leaves, a scent that carried unease with it. I climbed the steps slowly. The suitcase wasn't mine, at least, not the way I'd left it. When I unzipped it, I found my clothes, my documents, a few old letters from my father, all stuffed inside haphazardly. And at the very top, a note written in Valora's cursive. "It's time you moved on, sweetheart." I stepped inside the house. The silence wasn't natural. It felt deliberate. The living room was spotless, unnervingly so. My father's portrait was gone from the wall, leaving a clean square of lighter paint where it had hung for decades. When I turned toward the hallway, my heart dropped. Scattered across the floor were shreds of photographs, my baby pictures, school portraits, family holidays. Torn neatly, almost methodically, like someone wanted to erase me piece by piece. On the rug near the stairs lay the small wooden music box my father had given me when I was 10. Its lid was cracked open, gears exposed, silent. The tiny ballerina inside was snapped at the waist. That was when I heard footsteps from the kitchen. Slow, measured, deliberate. I followed them until I saw Valora standing at the counter. She was calm, far too calm, wiping her hands on a white towel that was already smudged with dirt. "I thought you'd come back tonight," she said, without turning around. "What did you do to my things?" I demanded. She smiled faintly. "I'm cleaning up your mess." Sable appeared behind her, holding a red gasoline canister. My stomach dropped. The faint scent I'd noticed outside wasn't just autumn air, it was fuel. "You want this house so badly," Sable said, her eyes flashing. "Fine. Let it burn with you inside." I froze. For a heartbeat, I thought she was bluffing. But when Valora took the canister from her daughter and began pouring gasoline in slow, deliberate arcs along the hardwood floor, the sharp odor filled my throat. "Stop!" I shouted, stepping forward. "You've lost your mind." Valora turned to face me, her expression almost serene. "You've already destroyed everything your father built. I'm simply ending it properly." Sable's voice cracked into a scream. "Finish her, Mom." The sound ripped through the house, echoing off the walls. For a moment, I thought this was how it would end here, in the same home where I grew up, surrounded by the ghosts of every lie they ever told. But before Valora could move again, a shout came from outside. Then glass shattered. "FBI! Step back!" The front door burst open, and agents flooded in, guns drawn, voices commanding, boots pounding against the floorboards. The world turned into flashes of movement, Valora dropping the canister, Sable backing away with her hands up, agents shouting for compliance. It all blurred together. I heard Narina's voice from the entryway, urgent and shaking. "She's safe. She's safe." The realization hit me. Narina had set this up. She told me to leave my camera on, and the Bureau had been monitoring through the cloud stream. They had seen everything in real time. Agent Morales stepped forward, calm amid the chaos. "Valora Jarvis, Sable Jarvis, you're under arrest for attempted arson, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Valora's composure cracked for the first time. "You can't prove." "We just did," Morales interrupted, holding up a tablet where the live recording still played. Sable started crying. "Mom, what did you do?" she whispered. Valora didn't answer. She simply looked at me, eyes cold and unblinking. "You brought strangers into our family," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "You did that the moment you tried to erase me." The agents cuffed them both and led them outside. As the front door swung open, the red and blue lights washed across the walls, painting everything in alternating flashes of justice and shame. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, whispering, filming with their phones. I sank to the floor, shaking, the smell of gasoline still sharp in the air. Morales crouched beside me. "You were brave to stay," he said softly. "Most don't survive this level of betrayal." I nodded weakly, unable to speak. Tears came, not from fear anymore, but from the release of everything I'd carried since the funeral. Hours passed before the last agent left. The sirens faded into distance. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by chaos, broken glass, damp gasoline streaks, and the faint hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Outside, journalists were already setting up on the lawn. I saw the flashes of their cameras through the windows, like lightning. One shouted a question. "Paige, how long has this been going on?" I didn't answer. I turned away from the window, walked slowly through the wreckage of my family's history, and closed the door to the living room behind me. Upstairs, I opened the drawer where my father's letter still rested. The edges were frayed now, the ink slightly faded, but the words remained. This house is yours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I sat down on the floor and whispered to the dark, I'm still here, Dad. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like survival. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. The message read, that wasn't the only thing they forged. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening, the fragile piece collapsing all over again. That wasn't the only thing they forged. The sunlight pouring through the courtroom windows had a softer edge than I expected. I walked in quietly, steadying myself as I did, slipping into the wooden pew and glancing at the faces around me. It had been 6 months since everything changed. 6 months of gathering evidence, sleeping fewer hours, learning to measure every breath under the weight of expectation. Now I was here, the final act in a long fight. When the bailiff called the court to order, I felt my shoulders relax and then tighten. I crossed my legs, straightened my shirt, and held tightly to the envelope in my lap. It wasn't the only envelope I'd brought, but the one I needed was safe. My father's handwritten letter, the forged documents, the old will with his signature, they were all on my side. The judge spoke clearly. On the charge of estate fraud, the court finds the defendant, Valora Jarvis, guilty as charged. My heart thumped in my chest like the old swing Dad once built. I met her eyes briefly. She didn't flinch, but as she was handed the sentence, I watched years of manipulation unraveling. Then the judge addressed Sable Jarvis. You are hereby ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and serve a reduced sentence in view of your cooperation with the investigation. A gasp rippled through the gallery. I remained still, and tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Finally the judge looked at me and said, And this house rightfully belongs to Paige Jarvis. The words hung in the air. The room paused. I exhaled slowly. My name spoken with authority in a courtroom. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't vanish again. Later, I returned to my father's study for the first time since the chaos. The carpet still felt plush underfoot, the scent of his pipe tobacco faint but unmistakable. I approached his desk and pulled open a drawer. Behind the frame of a photo, me and Dad on summer vacation, I found another manila envelope labeled in his handwriting, in case they silence me. Inside, the original will, notarized, dated, listing every property, every asset all in my name. I sat in the chair, grief and relief circling each other. I filed the will into my personal safe deposit box and decided not to press further criminal charges. The sentence had been delivered. Justice had arrived, but I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. Back in the main room, tools of the past surrounded me. The swing Dad built, the old toolbox, framed recognitions from his charity. The ghosts lingered, but they weren't specters of helplessness anymore. They were witnesses. I walked through the house slowly, methodically, acknowledging each room. In the kitchen, I paused by the marble island where we once baked cookies. In the hallway, I touched the banister, the one he used to slide down softly after dinner. I visited my father's gravesite that afternoon, the snowdust faint in the grass, the music box now repaired sitting on his marker. I opened the lid and the soft lullaby played. You were right, Dad, I whispered. They couldn't take my light. The sound of the box and the wind rustling through the trees seemed to fold together. I didn't expect satisfaction. There was no elation, just stillness. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly between the echoes of what was and what will be. In the weeks that followed, I started hosting a small weekly circle at the house. Women from the town who had been silenced by their families, shut out of wills, pushed aside. We sat around the kitchen table, now reclaimed as ours, sharing stories and planning next steps. I invested time, not out of bitterness, but because I believed that someone needed to hold the torch when the rest of the room went dark. A podcast producer reached out and asked me to tell my story. I said yes, not for the spotlight, but for legacy. On air, I said, this isn't a story about victory. It's about survival and choosing not to become what hurt you. My voice cracked then, but I steadied it. The listeners heard not just the tears and fear, but the calm, still small hope that came after. Now, 6 months later, it's midwinter, and snow begins to fall outside my window. I sit with a cup of tea, the white flakes drifting past the glass. A child rides a bicycle down the street and waves at me. I wave back and I smile. I'm still here. Before we close this chapter, here's what I've come to believe. Sometimes, the ones who hurt you the most were the face of family. But surviving that betrayal and standing your ground can become your greatest act of self-respect. What would you do if the people you trusted tried to erase your voice? If this story moved you, or if you faced something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, raw, and powerful stories